In this question, given only two numbers about cost per unit and total cost, we're going to fill in all the remaining costs listed in the table. We're going to do this based on our understanding of cost behavior. So before we get started filling in the numbers on our table, let's visit what we know about cost behavior for fixed, variable, and mixed costs. Let's start off with what we know about fixed cost behavior. Total fixed costs will stay the same no matter how many units are produced. However, fixed cost per unit will change as the volume of units changes. Now let's talk about what we know about variable cost behavior. In total, variable costs will change as the volume of units changes, but variable cost per unit will stay the same. Now let's talk about what we know about mixed cost behavior. Since a mixed cost is a combination of a fixed and a variable cost, total mixed costs change when volume of units changes, and mixed cost per unit also changes as the volume of units changes. Now that we have summarized cost behavior in our top table, we're ready to apply our understanding of when costs change and when they stay the same in order to fill out our second table. The trick to solving this question quickly is to calculate the rows where you know that the cost figure will stay constant. So, based on our table above, we know that those two rows are variable cost per unit and total fixed costs. Once we calculate the value at one level of production, we can carry that value across all three columns. We could start with either of these two rows that I've highlighted in blue, but I'm going to start by calculating total fixed costs. At a production level of 13,000 units, I know that fixed cost per unit is $2.40. So to convert that into the total fixed costs, I'm going to take the cost per unit and multiply it by the number of units to calculate total fixed costs. And that equals $31,200. I know that total fixed costs stay the same no matter what level of production there is, so I can carry that $31,200 across all three columns on the total fixed cost row. Now that I have total fixed costs, I can also calculate my fixed cost per unit at 10,000 units and at 16,000 units by dividing total fixed costs by the number of units in the column. Now I can take these fixed cost per unit figures and put them into the appropriate column. Now let's switch to the other cost that we know remains constant at all levels of production volume, which is variable cost per unit. We can calculate variable cost per unit by taking total variable costs and dividing it by the number of units in the column. And when we do the math there, we get a variable cost per unit of 85 cents. Since variable costs per unit remain the same at all production levels, we can input that 85 cents into all three columns in the row for variable cost per unit. Now we can calculate total variable costs at 10,000 units and at 16,000 units by taking variable cost per unit and multiplying it by the number of units in each column. So we've calculated total variable costs to be $8,500 when 10,000 units are produced and $13,600 when 16,000 units are produced. So now we can input those values into the table. Now we are ready to calculate the last row in each of our sections. First, let's do total operating costs. Total operating costs is the combination of variable costs and fixed costs, which makes it a mixed cost. So to calculate it, we'll just take the total variable costs and the total fixed costs in our column and add them together. Now let's look at our bottom section and calculate the average cost per unit. The average cost per unit is the sum of the variable cost per unit and the fixed cost per unit, which also makes it a mixed cost. So to calculate the average cost per unit in each column, we're simply going to add the variable cost per unit to the fixed cost per unit. We've now completed our entire table. Notice that the average cost per unit decreases as the number of units produced increases. You will always see this trend with an average cost. So in summary, Based on our knowledge of when costs change and when they stay the same, we can calculate average cost per unit and total operating costs at any production level. All we need is one number from the top section and one number from the bottom section provided, and that concludes our exercise.